presently. And I get a lot of heat about the fact we're asking people to take a look at what we're spending today and make sure it's being done efficiently. But I will say to you that transit is a huge priority, and I would say it is the top priority. I've made no secret of the fact that housing and adequate public space, public amenities, are also very high priorities, because if you look at those things that physically help to define what is a livable city and attract investment and keep people in a comfortable city they're proud of, those are three very top things. And I think most of the projects on that long list fit into those categories. So you have to find a way to do all of them in due course, but obviously you can't do everything at once. So the challenge is going to be what we can do to pay for them and how we can get on with them as quickly as possible. But my determination to build that park, because it is going to be something that is important. And by the way, after that park is built, and it will be built, after that park is built, there will still be a deficiency of parkland in downtown Toronto, given the population projections that are going on. And I don't find that acceptable. People who live in condo towers don't have a backyard and don't have a front yard. And so you have to have a park for them to be outside and for them and their children to be active, and there's going to be more families living there. And you have to have libraries for them to have a place to go because they don't necessarily have a family room or a computer room. And I just think this is basic city building. And I'm making up for the time that people didn't spend making these decisions and deciding how to pay for them in previous years. And that will be the hallmark of what I will do in the time that I'm given here.
What do you make of Pride Toronto's statement today, the apology, and then a spokesperson from Black Lives Matter saying, while the apology is good, it's not action?
I'm not really going to get into commenting on all the different sort of steps that are going on as Pride and Black Lives Matter try to sort out a number of issues that they're sorting out. Pride is having open consultations. I haven't attended them, but I've certainly been reading the reports of those consultations, and I wish them well in sorting out some issues that are complicated and potentially difficult. And I look forward to it all happening in a way that we can have a very successful Pride next year and a very inclusive Pride.
You were talking today through a release from your office about hydro infrastructure and the fact that it's lacking behind the needs of the city right now. I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, who gets the blame for the situation getting to this level?
Well, I think Hydro's been careful not to finger point, because I think at the end of the day, even people don't have as much interest in finger pointing as they do just saying, how can you tell me my power is going to be more reliable? But I'll just briefly tell you that in the case of the downtown outages that affected the condominiums near City Place, a huge demand in power created by those very same condo towers I was just discussing, and combined with the fact there hasn't been a new transformer station built in 30 years. So if you go back and look at all the condo and office projects that were approved in 30 years in the downtown space, and ask yourself the question of how many hydro transformer stations were built new during that same period, the answer is 0. And you have to ask yourself whether that was, again, the right way to go about all of this. So one is under construction now, but it's not completed yet. It soon will be. In the meantime, what they have done in that instance, where we had a very hot summer and huge demand and so on, is they have replaced some cable that failed. And it failed, and again, I didn't understand all the science of this, but it was explained to me. When the cable has a huge load on it, it makes it more likely that the cable, which is as big around as a pipe, the covering on it actually splits open, and it renders then the cable fails. So they replaced 2.5 kilometers of cable in that area in order, in the meantime, while the new power station is finished, to make the service more reliable. And so I think the accountability there rests with Hydro, and it rests with past decisions, including those of the city government, because in the end, Hydro is owned by the city government, that had a situation arise where there wasn't a new transformer station built for 30 years. On the Young Eglinton ones, actually it had more to do with the way that condominium was constructed and where the power room was placed relative to a water main. And quite frankly, there, if you want to look at it, the accountability rests much more with the condominium development than it does with Hydro, who actually performed heroics in getting service restored to those buildings much faster than you might have expected, given the complexities of doing that, which again have been explained to me. But again, I will say this. I don't think people are too interested in pointing the finger of blame. I think what they're interested in knowing is that their mayor their hydro corporation and their condominium corporations and developers who do things in the city are working together to make sure power is reliable in the city. That's why I called the CEO of Hydro over here. That's why he explained this to me, and I'm satisfied they're continuing their investigation of these outages and taking steps necessary to stop them from happening in the future.
Mayor
Couple
Tory,
more
you recently
questions?
visited the First Nations community. Today, Gord Downey announced 2 shows, part of a project that focuses on the death of a 12-year-old Indigenous boy back in the 60s. From what you witnessed, is it time after decades for governments to finally step up? And even as a city, what can we do?
I think in the City of Toronto there are 2 things that we can be doing, and both of which I kind of embarked upon in earnest when I came back from visiting up north. The first is to actually look at some of the challenges facing urban Aboriginal people, urban and Indigenous people, which in a way are a separate category of issues from some of the remote communities that I have visited, including the ones most recently. And so I had in, shortly after I came back, within a couple of days, the head of our Aboriginal Advisory Committee, the non-political, non-elected person. And we discussed some things that could be done, and he has given me some very clear indications of some of the work that we can do to improve the degree to which we can provide support to urban Indigenous people. The second thing is raise awareness. Toronto is a different city than, say, Edmonton or Winnipeg or Calgary, a lot of the cities out west, because we don't have the proximity of Indigenous communities, First Nations communities right around the city and huge populations inside the city. And that's even true of, say, a place like Thunder Bay. And so I'm going to be doing a number of things over the next period of time to raise awareness of some of these issues that exist outside of our city in the context of justice for our Indigenous people. One of them is that I'm very hopeful that I can lead a walk for reconciliation, which in Vancouver attracted tens of thousands of people, average citizens who said, yes, I care about this, I'm going to learn more about this, I'm going to do something about this as an average citizen, even if it was just to walk. And I would hope, because we've had some initial discussions about it, we could do that next year in the better weather. And it's something that the First Nations people are quite interested in pursuing with me. But we're going to take some tangible steps. And even my trip, though, was meant really, in the write-up that I sort of did, and I wrote that myself about the trip in the Toronto Star, it was meant to raise awareness of the fact there are these issues that we can sometimes ignore living in Toronto because it's very far away from us, but these are living conditions and circumstances for our First People that no Torontonian and no Ontarian and no Canadian would ever accept if they saw it firsthand, which I had the opportunity to do. And I was also anxious, as Mr. Downey is, and I congratulate him for that, to draw attention to some of the past injustices. I was a history student in university, and the amount of time we spent on First Nations and Indigenous people's history was pretty small. And I learned a lot about that history when I went up north for 4 days and lived with families in those remote communities. And it's not a history to be proud of. And I think we've got to understand that too, just as a means of moving forward.
City News has been analyzing homicide stats.
Sorry, we'll do 1, 2, 3, and then we're done. Okay, you're next. Sorry.
Toronto have a foreign home buyer tax like the one in Vancouver?
I've answered this question many times, and I've answered it with a non-answer. Not that I'm trying to avoid it, but I think you bring in a solution when you've identified a problem and you've identified what the right solution is to that problem. We are doing work right now, both monitoring the Toronto housing market and sitting with the other governments to try and determine if there's a problem here. I know there's a problem with affordability, but if there's a problem with people manipulating the market in some way. And as yet, there's nobody that's reached any conclusions or given me any advice to the effect that there's an identifiable problem that we could, sort of attach a solution to. And so I'll just say that we're watching it very closely, and that the main thing I'm focused on at the moment, and I'll have much more to say about this in the coming days as we approach our housing summit, is increasing the supply of affordable housing. Because that, I think, is the single thing that I do know we can do in partnership with the other governments in order to help people to afford to live in the City of Toronto.
City News has been analyzing homicide stats over the past 5 years, and currently there are 73 unsolved shootings. What can we do to change that stat?
Well, first of all, you have to be careful how you look at these statistics, because in various years you will see that there's in fact been a dramatic improvement in the solution rate to stabbings or to shootings, and the trends oftentimes are improving, sometimes they're going down. But you can't necessarily sort of look at this and sort of say, well, based on 1 year, that there's some kind of a trend in any given area. But I think what is most important at this moment in time is the following. one of the reasons why the police are having difficulty, in particular with the shootings, which, as I've indicated earlier, many of them the police identify to us on the police board are gang-related, is the fact that people are reluctant to speak to the police and to cooperate with the police. And I think we have to get to the stage where people are more comfortable as a means of preserving their own safety in their own communities to cooperate with the police, and the police and other authorities have to make sure people feel as comfortable as they possibly can in sharing that information. But I know just from the places I've been to visit neighbors and family members in the aftermath of those shootings that when you hear the scene described to you, you know that people saw something. You know that they even sometimes saw the people who did it, but they're reluctant to speak, and we have to get ourselves over that, and it's difficult to do. And I just repeat that message, that people are going to do make the biggest contribution they possibly can to improving that crime-solving rate if they help and cooperate with the police and keep their eyes open at all times about things they see that are unusual. I said Jeff, and then if Amanda wants to pick one more so she can be the bad guy. Jeff, you've been patient, go ahead.
The architects behind Nathan Phillips Square, the Revolution there, have been recognized for their work, but are you not disappointed in the botched job the city made of Nathan Phillips Square? There's a giant gravel field of emptiness on the west side of it. Is there not more that can be done to make the city's front door more attractive?
Well, again, Jeff, there are times when you just can't win, the gravel field that you refer to is there because the city, in my view, correctly decided, and I think they decided this before I got here, not to put a restaurant there. And I think that while people had dreams of having a restaurant on Nathan Phillips Square, I'm not sure we're in the restaurant business, and I'm not sure the city's premier public square is the right place to have a restaurant. And so what you have there today is a piece of land, I'd rather describe it that way, where we are talking now about what we could do there. But that's the reason why it's that way. I, myself, I didn't read these particular comments, but I will say to you for myself, in looking at the Peace Garden and so on, I'm proud of that. I think it's a beautiful public space. I've heard lots of positive comments about it this summer from people visiting the square. I was not happy, but it happened again before I got here with the budget overages and whatnot that happened with that project. But I will say to you that the finished product, with the exception of this one place that resulted from a very specific decision not to put a restaurant there, is, I think, a very good product, and we will decide what to do with that space to make sure it fits in a very beautiful and appropriate way with the city's premier public space.
So the city's website reveals that there's 683 disruptions today alone, traffic disruptions. Is that an acceptable number in your view?
I can't, you know what, I've never heard that particular number before, and it wouldn't be up to me to sort of say what's an acceptable number. I think most people understand that in a big city with hundreds of miles of road, probably thousands of kilometers of road, that you are going to have traffic disruptions caused by construction, caused by private condo construction, caused by accidents, caused by various things, and that my objective has been and continues to be to get that number down from whatever it is. If you said it was 6, I'd say, well, let's see if we can get it to 0. But it's a big city with a lot of moving parts, and we're working very hard, and the whole purpose of having this update for you today was to tell you that we're working hard on every front, from technology to construction to event management to construction management, to try and get traffic moving better in the city. And I am absolutely confident that what we've done so far has certainly stopped it from getting worse, and I think has made noticeable improvements that people tell me about in different areas of the city. And we'll keep working just as hard tomorrow as we did today. Thanks very much.
All right, Mayor John Tory taking questions from the media at City.